Thank you all for coming. Folks may be joining in digitally. Welcome if you do. My name is Carolyn. I use she, they pronouns. We are here at the wonderful Shag in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Today's quickie workshop is on polyamory. It's called Polyplay 101. I did this workshop initially, I want to say like a year and a half ago maybe. And it was quite popular, so we ended up doing a 201 as well, but folks have requested going back to the basics, so that is what today is. But you can check out our other videos on YouTube or also on our Instagram page at We Love Shag, where there's more about poly stuff from me on there. So today's workshop is a workshop for anyone who is curious about polyamory and consensual / ethical non-monogamy. Maybe you're already practicing non-monogamy, maybe not. If you are, this is a great sort of refresher on tips and tricks and communication and terms. And if you're brand new to it, then I will be breaking that down for you today. If you're joining online, hello, feel free to answer or ask any questions in the comments. I will keep an eye on that as well. Okay, so we're going to go over some 101 terms of relationships, relationship terms and structures, including the difference between polyamory and non-monogamy. They're used interchangeably a lot, but that's often incorrect. Different types of relationship structures or partnerships you may seek. We're going to focus on jealousy a little bit. That's, I feel like, one of the entry points for folks who are coming into non-monogamy. I have a lot of questions about jealousy. And then we'll give some just kind of tips and tricks for how to create healthy dynamics with multiple partners. So we have a whole library here at Shag, and there are a couple books that I'm going to be pulling from mostly that I just wanted to showcase for those online and for those in the room. Has anyone here heard of The Ethical Slut? Yes, getting some nods. Okay, so this might be mirrored on Instagram, but The Ethical Slut here by Janet W. Hardy and Dossie Easton. This has been, well, we've had that at Shag for a long time, but it has been around for decades. And then Tristan Tamarino also did Opening Up. One we don't actually have on our shelves right now that I might be referencing as well is called Polysecure by Jessica Fern. That's probably my favorite these days. But just wanted to showcase those before I get into some of the terms, because that's where I'm getting a lot of my resources from. So The Ethical Slut is kind of seen as like the Bible for poly people, at least as like a canonical, foundational place to start. So the way that they break down sort of the difference between polyamory and consensual or ethical non-monogamy is that ENM or CNM, non-monogamy, is really the umbrella term for anyone who is practicing non-monogamy as different from cheating or like infidelity. But doing so with enthusiastic consent from all parties involved. So it's the umbrella term for the practice of non-monogamous intimate or sexual relationships that are distinguished from infidelity by the knowledge and consent of those involved. So if anyone identifies as queer or within the LGBTQ plus kind of category, I like to use that as an analogy as well. Like some people will just say, oh, I'm queer, but maybe there's another more specific label that they use amongst close loved ones. Like I identify as queer, I also identify as bi or pan, which is a little bit more specific than just the umbrella term of being queer. So non-monogamy can be kind of similar, where folks may say, oh, I'm non-monogamous, but they may practice a particular type of kitchen table polyamory or parallel polyamory, which we can get into. So just to say it's really the umbrella. Polyamory specifically is the practice of having or the capacity to have multiple loving relationships. So the real difference there is someone may be non-monogamous and not have the capacity to fall in love with multiple people. They may just have the capacity for one significant partner, as we often see, and maybe others that they date or have kind of like fluid friendships and also maybe fool around with. And that is one beautiful structure, but it's not polyamory. Poly in its essence is about having the interest and capacity or wiring for multiple significant loving or in love potentially relationships. So when people say that they're poly and they're telling me that they're like married and have one other person they see like once a year or just date occasionally, I'm like, well, do you identify as poly? Cool, but maybe in practice there's a differentiation there. There's no wrong at all. There's just differences, and I think the terminology can be really helpful when you are putting yourself out there and wanting to meet other people, to be able to communicate correctly, like how you're practicing or what your identity might be. So some core concepts that are definitely addressed in both of these books, but that are kind of at the cornerstone of someone who may identify as poly or want to practice polyamory, is this idea of the scarcity, like a scarce economy sort of myth. So this idea that love is scarce. So if I love one person 100%, and then I invite a second person into my life, that may split the love 50-50. And a lot of people in this world hold that core belief that that's actually not true, that in reverse, actually love is abundant. And the only real constraint is actually about resources, like how many hours in the day you have, how many days in the week that you have to commit to certain relationships, to to your work, to yourself, to therapy, to your hobbies. Like that's the real constraint, is actually about time and energy and resources, not that loving multiple people actually limits the amount of love that there is to give or receive. One very kind of fundamental analogy I use for that is if you think about a parent that may have multiple children. They're not going to say they love two kids 50 and 50. They love them each 100%. They just have, they have to split their time. Sometimes they all hang out together. Sometimes they have individual time with their kids. So it's a different, people often don't think of those as the same, but it's actually the same principle when it comes to romantic or loving or sexual relationships. Any questions so far? I'm going to pause. Okay, great. Another sort of core belief there is the capacity for multitudes, and the idea that not one person is going to be able to fulfill or be compatible with all of your intricate needs and desires and interests. And in fact, it can be really beneficial to have a whole sort of slew of people or who may fill those desires and needs for you. And another sort of analogy I'll use for folks who are really new to this is thinking about your friends. You may have one friend that you really connect on films with, and like that's your film buddy, and you go to the movies together. But you have another friend where like they're really not into the same type of genre, but you connect in all these other ways, like books or your relationships or whatever. And that's seen as very normal and common and actually very additive. So you're not having these duplicative relationships or friendships. And it's the same when it comes to romance or sex. You may have a really fulfilling relationship in one area that is different inherently with a different person. And that can be very fulfilling and create sort of a feedback loop of positivity. So those are two kind of core beliefs for folks who are practicing non-monogamy. A couple different ways or types of relationships. I mentioned like parallel and kitchen table to get into. So I'm going to start from kind of like the most utopic to maybe not the least. That's my own personal opinion, so take that with a grain of salt. But something I guess a little bit more like normative. So the kitchen table polyamory is if you literally imagine a kitchen table and there are lots of partners or metamors, I'll get to that term in a second, around the table. It's essentially this idea that when a polycule, so like a constellation of people who are connected through romance, resembles a loose family structure. So the idea in the kitchen table structure is that everyone knows each other in some way and relates to each other in some way, whether that's through friendship or metamor, which is your partner's partner, I'll get to that, or through romantic relationships or sexual relationships. So there's a real familiarity, and I use that word intentionally, like there is a family-like familiar relationship to one another around the kitchen table. That requires a really high level of communication and openness and transparency amongst all parties. Then you can think about parallel polyamory. So that might be you have multiple partners, but they don't necessarily know each other or they don't necessarily interact. It's consensual where they all know about each other. Hey, I have multiple partners, but maybe one lives in Texas and the other lives with me in New York, and amazing. And maybe you date someone else every so often, and none of them have met, but they're all aware of each other and consenting to the situation. That might be more parallel, where you have your individual relationships that are kind of separated, whether that's intentionally or through geography or otherwise. Lastly, there's kind of the don't ask, don't tell structure. This is the one I'm inserting my opinion here, but I would caution away from this. I think there's a lot of fear and shame rooted in this, model, but some people, prefer it, and that's really when you are avoiding sharing details with your partner about the other romantic or sexual interactions that you have. And ideally, everyone's consenting to that model before you're doing it, to say, okay, I'm going to go on a date, and the other person's like, I want to hear nothing about it. I don't even want to know who the person is. I would argue maybe there's more to explore in that, to look at why there's that avoidance. But those are some structures that seem pretty popular and that work for folks. A couple other terms within this that I think are frequently used that you may see if you're putting yourself out there or looking at people's dating apps online. The term primary partner is often used, especially in hierarchical relationships, where someone may have a partner that is primary in their life, and whether that is prescriptive or descriptive. Descriptive in the sense of like, well, we do spend 5 nights a week together because we really love each other and it's fun, but also we're open to that changing or open to other people coming along. So it's kind of just describing the de facto relationship, versus prescriptive may be someone who's like, this is my primary partner and they will always come first, and that is always going to be the priority. Both primary, just different approaches. A nesting partner is typically referred to someone who you might live with. They can also be your primary, they might not. You may have a nesting partner that you're really close with that's actually not your primary partner. An anchor partner, I love this term. It's a partner with whom you're planning around and you feel this like attachment towards, and they're very significant and anchoring, like grounding for you. Definitely there's some like significance to that word, I would say. If you're going in the hierarchy model, there's also secondary. A lot of people hate this term because it feels very, it can feel dehumanizing to be called a secondary, or to know that you are secondary to someone else. Other people really like it. There are some people who, maybe you're dating a married couple and you don't want to be the primary in that relationship. You actually really like being the secondary. You like not being super committed in the same exact way that they are, or sharing finances or whatever. So there's lots of different opinions on it, but it's good to acknowledge that that hierarchy is often there. And then comet, has anyone heard that term? A comet, so it shines bright and comes quickly, like comes through your life quickly, I should say. No pun intended there. And so that's, for example, like if you have a partner out of state or like in a different country, or maybe you just only see them every quarter or something, they kind of come through, you have a great time, but it's not something as integrated into your life. That's what a comet is, and I think that's a fun poly term. And then metamor, I mentioned this before, but is your partner's partner. So if you are dating a married couple, and if I'm dating the woman, the wife, then the husband may potentially, if it's a hetero couple, that husband, if I don't date them, might be my metamor. So we share a partner. Any questions so far? Keep going. I'll leave questions. There'll be room at the end as well. So some of the kind of top skills that folks really recommend digging into, these books do a really good job kind of inciting thoughtful reflection and introspection. But the kind of top skills I would say are needed to develop is, definitely a curiosity for people, an interest in freedom, like being able to explore different corners of sexuality and different types of people and personalities, a belief in the abundance of love, and sort of antithetical to that scarcity mindset. And I say, this workshop, is for anybody who's interested and curious, but it is not for everybody, and that's completely fine. There are plenty of people in my life who identify as consciously monogamous, as in they're not just monogamous because that's the only thing that they've ever heard of, and that's the only thing that they were given on a silver platter, because that's what society, benefits. But they're consciously choosing to be monogamous. Like, oh, I've learned about different options, and this is what I choose, this is how I identify. That's awesome. I celebrate that just as equally as I would polyamory or anything else. So it's not for everyone, but it is, the skills needed to require are sort of trading in one set of problems for another. It's not easier, it's not necessarily harder, depending on who you are, it's just a different skill set. Radical honesty is another that I really value when it comes to polyamory, both with yourself in terms of what you want from different relationships, what you're open to, and then also getting to the core of how you're feeling, and then also being able to communicate that with others in a timely fashion. So others, to be emotionally intelligent, ideally that would be helpful in any relationship. An independent sense of self, strong communication skills, flexibility, and time management. As I mentioned about the resources, those are all great skills to have. What some people don't tell you about polyamory that I will give a little hint towards, the fatigue of sort of having people come and go in your life. And that's kind of just dating in general, but if you are poly or you're wanting to be on dating apps a lot, there can be a sense of fatigue of not necessarily feeling settled. If you are open to change frequently and you're experiencing change a lot, that can be tiring. Jealousy never really gets old, but you definitely get better at handling it and learning new skills to actually approach that with curiosity. We'll get to that in a minute. This one I love. You will probably meet more people that you will want to love than you have capacity for. So that is a huge one. It's just about time management. Again, you may feel really, really saturated, like, oh, I've got multiple partners. I don't have room to really add anyone else in. And then you go on a work trip and you meet someone amazing who's poly and you're like, shoot, what do I do here? And that happens a lot. That can happen a lot if you're saturated. So that's a beautiful problem to have, but still can be a problem. Those people can come back around though, which is fun if you communicate well. Your dating standards may become a lot higher because you're having multiple fulfilling partnerships, or you're working and connecting with people who are at really high levels of communication about their feelings. You may experience a packed schedule. I've been referencing this a lot, but there's definitely a joke in poly communities that the number one skill to have is using Google Calendar, which is absolutely true. And I was referencing this before, but also to expect continuous change. Things don't always stay the same. People can come and go. And when you're choosing to be in open, in multiple open or loving relationships, you're risking what I think is an illusion, but a sense of security that you may have if you unconsciously decide to be monogamous with someone. There's kind of a stamp on your life of like, well, I have my person that I'm going to bring around to all my events and all my work events and the holidays, and there's sort of I think it's kind of an illusion of security. That person could leave at any time. You could leave at any time. But with polyamory, you're really open and seeing critically like, oh, things change a lot. And that can be scary for people. Okay. So then lastly, I will get into a bit more on jealousy. So the book I was holding up before, Ethical Slut does a good job with this as well, but the Tristan Tamarino book, Opening Up, I found to be really helpful when I was starting out with all of this. I think they do a good job in the book explaining that jealousy feels bad, and there's no reason to deny that. I think a lot of people ask poly folks like, oh, so you just must be immune, you never feel this, and that's a huge myth. It's just, again, there's a skill set that's acquired to make you feel more competent in being able to look at it. So taking it off the pedal, destigmatizing it is a really good first step. It's an emotion, it's a reaction, just like anything else might be, frustration, whatever. But if you're able to listen to it and listen to your body and actually get a bit curious about it, there's a lot of information, like really rich data that you can get from yourself by just getting a little bit more curious and less judgmental of yourself for feeling it in the first place. So the way that the book breaks it down is this idea that there are sort of four main concepts, four main feelings, like core feelings that exist under the layer of jealousy. So they encourage you in the book to really, when you feel a tinge of jealousy, to conceptualize that as like a flag, like a flag that you're getting. I don't want to say red flag, that's not right, but just like a signpost, like, hey, there's something to explore here. So to actually look at it with curiosity right away and say, oh, this is coming up for me. What is actually underneath this? Am I feeling, and these are the four that they recommend, insecure, envy or envious, FOMO, the fear of missing out, or a sense of possessiveness. And so if you can think about an example right now of a time that you felt jealous romantically or sexually, and can actually go back and think about, okay, was I feeling insecure for whatever reason? Is there something in that romantic relationship that was happening that week that maybe we'd had a fight that was unresolved, and then they go out on a date and I'm realizing actually a good learning point is we should probably work to resolve that before you go out on another date. So I'm feeling more secure in the romantic relationship before you go and leave the nest. Envy is the person, even if you're feeling really secure, is the person that, your partner's going out with, in my case, like super tall and blonde, for example. I'm short with brown hair. Maybe that is something that might I might envy. Oh, I wish, this person is kind of holding a foil to insecurities or things that I envy in other people. FOMO, that can be actually a really positive thing, but I have fear of missing out. Okay, my partner's going on a date and they're going to this really fun concert with an artist that I love. Am I actually jealous, or am I just like, wow, I wish I could be there. That sounds really, really fun. I want to go to a concert. I'm going to go and look at tickets right now. Is it that? And then possessiveness is the only one that I would say is maybe not as healthy and is something to further explore. If you're feeling this sense of like, this is my partner, I own this partner, valid. Those are things that we've all learned and been socialized about, but it's not great to act upon that, and better to actually explore where those are coming from, what messages you received as a child growing up about ownership around romantic partnerships in your life, and good to kind of prod at that one a little bit more. There might be some more unlearning to do in that process. So some questions you can ask yourself in addition: what do I believe a great partner should be or do in a situation like this? Like, if this were in reverse, how would I want my partner to respond? What constraints are out of my control that are preventing me from being this person? So as I gave the example, like, okay, you're feeling really jealous, your partner's out on a date. Where else can I be compassionate towards myself? Maybe I had a really hard day at work, and maybe I need to like really give myself some extra TLC that night while they're on the date, whether that's, there's a question coming in, I will get to that in a second. Whether that's like taking a bath or calling a friend or going, and actually a great tip is like getting yourself out of the house if your partner's out. Maybe you make a plan. Doesn't have to be a date, but going to the movies with your really good friend, or taking yourself out to dinner, something that feels a little extra nice for your nervous system to feel like you're showing up for yourself. So yeah, looking at those kind of constraints, having compassion towards yourself for the environment that you're in that day, and just really being curious. There was a quick question before we move on. I'm curious when you might express the jealousy to not make your partner feel shame for you feeling that way. That's a really good question. Timing is super, super important. So in the example I gave where maybe you're in a relationship and you have a partner where you have an unresolved conflict and they're about to go out on a date, right before they head out the door is probably not the best timing to do that, right? If you are feeling okay with it enough in that situation, if you can think about it ahead of time, obviously, like maybe a day or two before the date could be fine. You have enough time to actually sit down, go through the feelings and connect. If there's not enough time, I think you're asking about, and specifically not wanting to, make them feel ashamed in any way. Then perhaps when they're on the date, re-regulate your nervous system. Like I said, whatever that would look like for your own mental health, a movie, a bath, some distraction, journaling, get to kind of the heart of what you're feeling. And then afterwards, maybe not right when they get home, but ask them to intentionally check in. Say, hey, how about tomorrow? Could we grab a coffee? And I would love to hear about how this went for you. And also, can I share with you a couple things that I have learned through this process? And come at it to the extent that you can with a little bit more of a calm and grounded place. The better that you can regulate your nervous system before having these conversations, the better the conversation will go, the easier it will land on the other person. And that's really hard. It all comes down to mental health and just being able to know your triggers and your nervous system as best you can when you're headed into those dynamics. And then, to your point, making sure that the timing is also considerate of the other people involved. Great question. Okay, lastly, I will say a couple things for do's and don'ts for folks that if you're here and you're interested in polyamory and you're having some questions about it, or you want to talk to someone who's poly or support a friend who's poly. So if someone comes out to you and says that they're poly or they're interested in this, similar to someone who's coming out as LGBTQ or queer, you want to celebrate that. This is something to celebrate. If you have your own questions, fears, stigmas around that, this is a good time to kind of hold on to those and explore later, and not with this person. They may be feeling really raw and vulnerable in this decision to share with you and to disclose. So it is not really the appropriate time to ask a lot of these questions. Like, well, don't you feel jealous? Or I could never, which is actually very polyphobic. You can use phobia in lots of different ways, but people have a lot of phobia to non-monogamous or poly relationships as well. So you do not want to do that when someone is sharing. You want to celebrate it to the extent that you can. Thank them for sharing. Ask if there's anything that you can do to support them in it, if they're comfortable with you asking questions now or at a later time, and really just lead with that consent piece of where are they at, and this is really about them, it's not about you. To say to somebody, is this the same thing as just sleeping around or dating? Absolutely not. The level of intention and communication and consent that is required to be dating in a non-monogamous way is so high. It is unbelievable. And for someone who's just single and dating multiple people, that's different. The idea of being single and maybe consciously monogamous or just monogamous is that you are dating to eventually maybe find your monogamous partner. That's very, very different to dating when you're poly, where you might be looking for multiple relationships. Yeah, so that's also something to avoid. And then for the sake of time, I will just share a couple other resources that we can also, if anyone has questions, you can DM us, we can share as well. But in addition to these two books, I mentioned Polysecure by Jessica Fern. This came out, I want to say like 2 years ago. I could be totally wrong, but it's pretty new. And she looks at like psychology and attachment theory. It's incredible. I think it's a really, really helpful way to understand what it takes to build a long-lasting poly relationship. And the sort of central idea there is like really digging in and creating a foundation that is safe enough to then leave and then return and leave and then return, and building this sort of safe haven and secure attachment within yourself and also with your partners to help mitigate things like jealousy and miscommunication. So that's a book I highly recommend. We don't have it here today. And then a couple other accounts on Instagram if you're interested in following. Polyamorous While Asian is an awesome account by Gabrielle Smith. She's actually a friend of mine. She's an incredible content creator around, an educator around non-monogamy. Remodeled Love is another really good one. That's an account that actually is like a polycule family that's raising kids right now and sharing updates around how that is going. It's really beautiful. And a couple dating apps, if you're interested, would be OkCupid, Field. I can't remember, but I feel like Tinder might have a non-monogamous filter at this point. I actually don't know, but several other sort of mainstream apps are actually doing that more and more these days, which is awesome. So those are a few to check out. Very last thing, I have a couple other Shag things to promote. For anyone who has listened, if you've gotten this far, you can get 10% off through Sunday on our website or in-store by using the code POLYPLAY. So that is, POLYPLAY for 10% off now through Sunday at midnight. For anyone who's made it this far, thank you. For those in the room, same to you. Our next free mini workshop is going to be at the end of April. It's April 25th, hosted by my colleague Lola, or Dirty Lola on Instagram. It's called April Showers, so if you're interested in squirting and all things wet, you should check that out. We have some beautiful workshop cards that I'm reading off of, so you can come and pick one of these up at Shag or just check out our website, weloveshag.com. Same person I mentioned, Lola, actually tonight is doing her famous Sex at a Go-Go at 7, so you have a half hour if you want to go and head over to Brooklyn Art House. She's going to do some education and entertainment there. And then we also do some awesome workshops at the Moxie in Williamsburg. The Moxie is a hotel. You can also find that at our website, weloveshag.com, and look at our events tab. We have a strap-on class coming up with Lola Jean, How to Be a Dominant with Queen Santana, and a bunch of shibari classes if you're interested in rope. We do those pretty consistently throughout the year, also at the Moxie, so you can check that out. I'm going to pause this here. If anyone else, I said that. If you have any other questions, you can DM us or just come in and stop by. We are here every day, 12 to 8. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.